We're going to have a very special panel discussion with three of our speakers here today. Two we've heard from, one we haven't heard from as of yet for today. And I think it's a discussion that we tried to shape around a topic which has become more popularized. People are talking more about mental health. They're talking more about its implications within the Muslim community. But we also wanted to include the general theme of wellness. How do we, as communities, keep ourselves mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually sound? And we have three people on stage here who all have varying levels of expertise within the field. And we wanted to kind of spread the love a little bit in terms of different areas of focus. So Dr. Farhan Abdulaziz, he's a surgeon in the ER in Dallas. So all like the crazy blood. You've seen everything pretty much. Just make sure you turn on your mic. Yeah, just get you guys to turn on your mics too.
Bismillah. Bismillah.
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah. Can you hear him? Just speak up a bit louder, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum. Okay,
salam.
so yeah, I'm an emergency medicine physician in Dallas, Texas. Alhamdulillah.
Right. So we'll ask a couple things maybe in your field. Sister Sada, who just spoke, is obviously a therapist and has been dealing with many Muslim clients. And Sister Khaltoon, who we heard from earlier, is also in the field of da'wah, works a lot with youth, women. So there's a lot that we can kind of draw from in terms of spirituality, in terms of our physical health, in terms of our emotional health. But I will start with Brother Farhan, who's next to me, because I asked you this question upstairs. And I think it is one that sometimes, maybe as a medical professional, you kind of get bombarded with quite often, which is somebody walks up to you and they tell you, doctor, I think I'm sick. I think I have a jinn. I think someone's done black magic on me. What's your first typical response to someone who approaches you with that type of question?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So I think within our community, it's a very common thought that if something's wrong with a person, whether it be your son or daughter or brother or sister, or sometimes even yourself, a lot of times it's family-imposed thoughts on someone, that there's possession involved or magic or sihr or something like this. I would first say that the overwhelming majority of cases is not possession or is not magic. And mental health is real. Muslims are no different than anybody else in our society in terms of having mental illnesses or mental conditions. So my first thought when someone comes with that is have you seen a professional yet? And when I say professional, not your local imam, because I would keep that second. First, I would say a mental health professional, a counselor, a psychiatrist, and talk to them first and see before going to that, because if the overwhelming majority of cases are actually mental, are physical conditions that can be treated, then that would be the first approach before going to the latter. And having said that, I would also strongly encourage everyone that it's not something to be ashamed of. It's not something to hide. As families, sometimes we feel that we can't take our children or take someone we love or someone we know to see a mental health specialist. And that shouldn't be the case, because we're allowing our families and our communities to suffer in silence, and we're now starting to see some of the fruits of that. In Baltimore, there was a case, I believe last year, of a young sister in an Islamic school who committed suicide. Coming from a broken home, watched a Netflix series on following someone who committed suicide, and she ended up committing suicide herself. And we're seeing a lot of examples of this coming out, and it's real. And so I would just strongly encourage, the first step I would say is see a professional in the field before doing anything else.
Jazakallah khair. And we have Sister Sada here, who's obviously in the field and has dealt with many clients, Muslim and otherwise. And I'll open up because I think this is very important. I myself see a therapist, and I have seen a therapist for quite a while, and I find it to be very important in my own life in terms of getting things off my chest, helping me to even resolve things on my own, because a lot of times a therapist doesn't give you the answers. They kind of give you the tools to come with those answers yourself. But yet, people might still be very hesitant to see a therapist or to be, prescribed some type of medication. Why do you feel that's the case? Being that, as Muslims, we're supposed to better ourselves. We're always looking for ways to become better as people. Why do you feel there's such hesitation still in our community to seek that type of help?
Jazakallah khair for sharing that. I just want to also just say that I really appreciate your openness about that, because I think a lot of people are very hesitant to open up about the fact that, about seeing a therapist. But, keep in mind that therapists see therapists, right? Me, all my therapist friends, we all have our own therapist because you need it, right? Especially in a field like ours where you're hearing all of the problems of everyone else, you need a place to process that for yourself, right? That you need a place to gain the tools to conquer your own obstacles in your own life, right? That therapy is not about you got to be crazy, you go to therapy, you get fixed, and things like that. It's not that. Therapy allows you for the opportunity to develop your goals, to figure out, okay, am I my best self? Am I my best self in all different aspects of my life? As a Muslim, in terms of my worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as a mother, as a daughter, as a son or father. I'm saying it because I'm talking about myself. But as, in all different aspects of your life, you want to be your best self. And that's one of the ways that we try to progress forward as Muslims, right? So I really appreciate you sharing that. I think it's about time that we start to alleviate the stigma associated with it. I think that a lot of times people are really hesitant to seek therapy because of a lot of misconceptions they have with regards to it. So there's the idea that, you go there and you're lying on a couch and you talk about, when I was 2, this happened, and then the therapist just sits there and says, tell me more. How does that make you feel? And everything, right? That's not what therapy is. Therapy is you come in and you talk about, like what I was talking about in the lecture. I'm really struggling with these thoughts. How can I deal with them? And we deal with it, right? That's what therapy is. The other thing is, I think that there's this idea that if I'm close enough to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I don't need anything else. That I can't be depressed if I'm Muslim. It's just not allowed, right? That I can't feel sad. I can't struggle, because if I read enough Quran, if I pray enough, if I make enough dua, if I say enough dhikr, then it should disappear, right? And those are all amazing tools, and I always encourage people to utilize them. I think that they're absolutely wonderful. But like what Sister Khaltoon was saying in her lecture, if we're not mindfully present, if we can't be present during our salah, if we can't be present when we're talking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our dua, we can't benefit from it. And so coming into therapy helps people to be more present, to alleviate the obstacles and the barriers that are on their minds, to allow them to benefit from that, inshallah.
And I want to add one thing, even though I'm technically not a panelist, but I just want to throw my 2 cents in. From my experience, therapy is also not your imam in the masjid just trying to take on everyone's problems, thinking that he is trained in that field. A lot of times our imams are, mashallah, jazakumullah khairan, they are classically trained in fiqh, in tafsir, and he's not a therapist. And I think we have to also stop offloading that responsibility onto our local imams, because there are a lot of imams who are really not qualified to be doing counseling. No offense to the imams here. Jazakumullah khairan. Just wanted to add that, because I think it is a reality that we have to also deal with. Sister Khaltoon, I wanted to also talk about the concept of wellness, because I think for many of us, wellness it's an emerging kind of philosophy that a lot of people throw that word around, wellness. Some people doesn't really mean much. But then there's also this idea of religiosity versus spirituality. Some people feel like I can be religious and I can do the 5 pillars, but I don't necessarily feel anything inside. Other people feel really great, but they don't actually practice the 5 pillars. How can we draw wellness from our tradition within Islam?
That's a really good question. Thank you for asking, Brother Bona. So I'll tell you how I learned about it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah At-Teen, He says, وَلَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ, right? We have created human beings in the best design. So when you think about it, like you read the tafsir, what is this best design that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us with? And it's, we have a physical body, we have an intellectual capacity, we have emotions, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made us in with the spirit, like a ruh that seeks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when you see the modern day, wellness, it's all about finding a holistic system of caring for yourself. Now, how did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teach us that? Like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَاهُ أَسْفَلَ سَافِلِينَ. So people are in complete loss and misguidance, except for those who have iman and they have taqwa. Who taught us about iman and taqwa? It's the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the Prophet sallam, like he's supposed to be our model, right, in how to live Islam. And how did he do it? And I want us to all think about like just a simple practice of waking up early in the morning to pray Fajr and sitting there and doing your dhikr until sunrise. And the Prophet ﷺ tells us, like, you know, if you do that, you get like the ajr of going to Umrah, like, and Hajj, tamma, right? So you do it seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but in it is your wellness for your, like, your ability to sit there and speak with Allah and talk to Allah and do your morning and evening adhkar where you're expressing your fears, you're putting your trust in Allah, you're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for complete wellness. You're entrusting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with your family, with your children, with your financial well-being, with your physical well-being, like everything. Right? So when you do that, it's like, and then when you read about all these like wellness and self-help books, they're essentially trying to tell us to do those things, right? So to me, I feel like there is no, the difference between the two is that if I seek it in the way of worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I do it because Allah tells me, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells Adam alayhi salam and Hawa, قُلْنَا هَبِطُوا مِنْهَا جَمِيعًا, like, get out of Jannah, go to the earth, فَإِمَّا يَأْتِيَنَّكُم مِّنِّي هُدًى فَمَنْ تَبِعَ هُدَايَ فَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا يَحْزَنُونَ. Whoever follows my guidance, then they will have no fear and no sadness, literally in dunya and akhirah, right? And so when we follow these practices, we realize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already revealed what going to take care of my whole person. Right? So in the sleep habits of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the way, like, you know, when we start salah and we actually connect with Allah and connect with ourselves and have mindfulness and have, like, it's all these things that science is showing us, like how to eat. The Prophet ﷺ already taught us all these things. And to me, wallahi, like, I'm mind blown when I see all these. The latest book that I read was called The Upward Spiral, where it was talking about how to deal with depression and anxiety. And some of the things that it mentioned, it was like, go out and smile at people because that will send something to your brain where you'll become happier. I'm like, what does the Prophet ﷺ tell us? Smile and you get hasana. So the reward is, like, do it for the sake of Allah and you're getting hasana. And science now, after all this research, is telling us this. I mean, alhamdulillah for science, right? But it's essentially only reaffirming everything that we find in the Quran and the Sunnah, right? So why are people now looking for spirituality somewhere else? To be honest, it's the story of Imam Ghazali, rahimahullah, when he was a jurist and he was excelling in terms of, like, what he has accomplished in his in dunya and mansib and having, like, ilm and people approaching him and coming from all over the world to study with him, and he realized that something was missing, and that thing that was missing was the spiritual part of his practice. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, أَلَمْ يَأْنِ لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَن تَخْشَعَ قُلُوبُهُمْ لِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. So isn't it time for those who have iman that their hearts find khushu'a? So we cannot take spirituality from our practices. But and the Prophet ﷺ, when he taught us all these practices, it wasn't just physical action. But we have to go back and ask ourselves, like, when did it become a physical action? How were we taught it? Who taught it to us? And make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us teachers who guide us to spiritual and practical, like, do both together, just like the Prophet ﷺ. So yeah.
Thank you very much. Very good answer, and a lot to digest, but I think there's a lot we can draw from that. Similarly, Dr. Farhan, I know you're very excited about this topic, so I wanted to give you something difficult, inshallah. Because I know there is currently, they say there's like an opioid crisis happening around America, not just America, around the world. People are slowly becoming much more addicted to prescription medication. There's also people that are just self-medicating through, sometimes even illegal drugs. Can you talk to us about the route of medication and what is it something that's good? Is something we should prioritize over something like therapy? Because obviously your background is in medicine. can you give us some insight into the growing trend of antidepressants and all these different medications which are being prescribed to us?
So, I think a couple things. I'm going to try and make sure I prioritize in my mind. Let's talk about the pain meds first that you alluded to. We definitely have a big problem in our society of abuse of drugs. And in the ER, we're the kind of the front lines for this, where we see patients coming in all the time with all sorts of made-up conditions. And the extent that people will go through and put themselves through to get the medicines from us, it's ridiculous. I mean, it's really is amazing. Sometimes I sit back and I'm like, wow, how much this person has done just so they can fool us into thinking that they have some sort of problem, to give them a medicine that will give them a high. It's interesting, we're so accustomed to getting pain meds from physicians, whereas overseas in European countries it's not like that. If somebody breaks a bone, they're treated with ibuprofen and Tylenol. They're treated with Motrin, you can get over the counter, and Tylenol you can get over the counter in European countries. But here, if you tell that to a patient, you know, I literally have had patients threaten to kill me and my family and my kids who I don't have if I don't give them the meds that they want. And this wasn't in Texas, by the way. This was in Michigan. The drug seekers in Texas are nice. If you tell them no, they just say okay. But the ones in Michigan, they'll pull out a Glock on you. So I would say this, that in general, with pain specifically, if anybody is dealing with pain issues, don't go to opioids. You can even a 10-pill prescription of Tylenol with codeine, a very light opiate, can be addicting. So if you can avoid it, avoid it. I've seen patients come in their 20s, and subhanAllah, their lives are destroyed because they're addicted to drugs. Right, their lives, they've got contracted HIV, they're literally like skeletons. I mean, have you ever seen that WhatsApp picture that was circulated, like somebody pre-cocaine, post-cocaine, and then you see them pre-cocaine, their beautiful face, post-cocaine, they're like they look like they're out of a zombie movie, pre-heroin, post-heroin, pre-biryani, post-biryani, they look amazing.
Those are the worst. Yeah. Pre-Ramadan, post-Ramadan.
So stay away from drugs. I mean, literally it destroys your life. Now, in terms of antidepressants, is medicine better than therapy and whatnot? So a lot of these psychological illnesses, bipolar, schizophrenia, these things, there's a wide array of theories behind why it starts, right? And it's not fully well understood yet. Genetics play a role. Environment plays a role. There are chemical imbalances that play a role as well in some cases, in most cases. And so for some people, therapy works well. For some people, medication works well. And for something like that, I would say definitely, again, see a mental health specialist to kind of help determine what's the best course of treatment for you. I would say in general, there has been a trend towards prescribing more medication, which I don't think necessarily is a good thing, especially in our younger children with ADHD and all sorts of diagnoses that are being given. If a kid plays plays video games for 5 minutes, they're prescribed medication for ADD, and kids are going to be kids, so there's got to be some wisdom there. But again, try and find a professional who can kind of counsel you on those things would be my advice.
Thank you very much. In that same kind of realm, a lot of times with young people, they are dealing with multiple issues in school, whether that be bullying, whether that be just trying to maintain their own Islamic identities. And I think the theme of resiliency is a very important one, because really, how do we instill that resiliency in our children so that they're able to overcome the troubles that life throws their way? Sister Sada, maybe you could talk more about that for the parents out there that do have children or have nieces, nephews, whatever family you have, even within adults. How do we build and instill resiliency in ourselves so that we are able to better overcome problems as they occur in our lives?
Jazakallah khair. Very good question, mashallah. With regards to resilience, there's a lot more talk these days from like a positive psychology perspective. So instead of the angle of, okay, my child has this issue, how do I alleviate it? It's more kind of preventative. How do I build resilience in my child so that they are less susceptible to certain issues, right? One of the things that I think is the most important aspect when we're raising our children is our relationship with them, right? Relationships are such a huge foundation. And if you look at the example of the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he was so beloved to people, in a large part due to the way that he made them feel, right? Where a man came and he asked Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, who's your favorite person, right? And so the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says, Abu Bakr, right? And then the man says, okay, and then who? And he goes, his daughter, right? And so the man just gives up at that point. But he was thinking that the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was going to say him, right? Why else does somebody really ask that question unless you think it's yourself? And that was the key, is that the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam made people feel so special that they assumed that they were so beloved to him, and he did show love and care to so many people, subhanAllah. That's the example we try to emulate, especially with our children. During their developmental years, if they feel like, and this is true of us as adults too, if you're in a relationship with somebody who only pinpoints what you do wrong, right? And this is what I find in marriage counseling all the time, right? You know, the complaints about what she's doing wrong, what he's doing wrong, and everything, right? If you're only pointing out what that person is doing wrong, what your child is doing wrong, the relationship is going to deteriorate tremendously, and it really impacts their self-esteem, which makes them a lot more susceptible to bullying, which makes them a lot more susceptible to anxiety and depression, right? But when you start to try and pay attention to what people in your life are doing right, especially your children, then it makes them feel proud, it makes them feel loved, it makes them feel supported and cared for and nurtured, right? Somebody I really respect once told me that people's relationships with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are very much like their relationships with people. So the best thing that we can do for our children, their resilience, and especially their resilience with regards to their Islam, is to show them how merciful and how kind we as their parents can be, because that tells them that if my parents are like this and I know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is even more, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves me, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is merciful, and that's going to help your child turn to him, right? And that spirituality, like research has found incredible correlations between resilience and spirituality. People being able to overcome depression, anxiety, different types of struggles due to spirituality. So instilling that into our children, focusing in on our relationships to try to maintain the health of the relationship is, I think, the most important factor we can give to our children, inshallah.
Jazakumullah khair. And we'll end off with a last question for Sister Khaltoon. And you kind of alluded to it in your last response and also in your talk, this notion of building spirituality, but at the same time, trying to figure out the best approach. I'm just trying to look at my exact question here because I had it written a certain way. Wellness, when it comes to the New Age philosophy, you'll find a lot of people now are moving towards things like yoga, things like meditation, a lot of these kind of buzzwords that are flowing around, and you have a bit of background in this field. Can you talk more about how do we combine our religious traditions with maybe some of the New Age, if I go on my phone, there's apps for meditation and breathing and all these things that, theoretically we might have somewhere in our deen. How do we combine those two things together and really help cultivate a true understanding of wellness?
I think it would honestly start with making dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us a teacher that takes us through that path. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent Jibreel to teach the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught it to the companions. And so our tradition is just like, what Sheikh Abdul Nasser Jangda was saying earlier. It's not something that we just learn from on our own. Like it has to be modeled for us, right? And so making dua for a teacher that teaches us, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inshallah will bless us with that. I don't see anything wrong per se with using these apps and using these tools, but to not replace the idea of when I go into salah, reciting the Quran is basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala communicating with me. So me having to sit with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying to me. So understanding and connecting with the verses that we're reading in our salah. It cannot replace that I am going to be present with my own self, and when I go into sujood, the time that I'm closest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I am going to make a dua and talk to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with an open and vulnerable heart. If I don't do that, then I'm basically like using these apps, which I personally don't use them because if I'm going to put effort in anything, I'd rather put it in my salah. If I have 5 extra minutes, then I rather pray, read, like, maybe like learn more about the du'as that I'm saying in my salah so that when I say them, I am connected to them. Do you see what I mean? So what I would suggest, like we're first Muslim, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us guidance already. If somebody has nothing, like no teachers to access to, there's nothing wrong with it. But then we have, like if we could go to our masajid and ask, like, I want to study a book of dua and I want to study the meaning of the Quran so that when I am praying, I can connect to it. And there's all these resources that are available to us online. So putting effort in connecting in our salah. So studying khushu', studying the meaning of the Quran, reciting words in the Quran, like from the Quran, like not just repeating Qul huwallahu ahad every time because that's the only thing you know. Spending time to actually study the meaning of the verses, memorize them, recite them in your salah, and have a dua. Like, what are you making dua for every day? What do you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? If we do that, our deen has all these, like, you know, like even like when it comes to meditation and just silent reflecting, I think it was Hassan al-Basri who said that I do 1 hour of silent reflection is better for me than doing qiyam al-layl the whole night. So there is, like, it's in our traditions, but how are we going to them? How are we finding them? So making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He give you the way to learn it from an Islamic perspective. If you don't have anything else, then there's nothing wrong with using these tools until you're able to find this, because at the end of the day, all these things help us with our well-being. But one of them gets you the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and earns you Jannah. So what do we want at the end of the day?
Very good. And, you know, very interesting. I'm sure literally we could be here the rest of the evening because there's so many different dimensions to this discussion. We didn't really get a chance to talk about dieting, about health, about nutrition, about you know, everything even in that regards, which is one thing I wanted to talk about, but we are a bit short on time. But I definitely want to thank all my panelists for their time and their efforts. Give them a big round of applause. Thank you so much for your insight. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us all the best, inshallah, in this life and in the next.